Ooh. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's digital transformation series. This is webinar 3, which is putting users first. I'm Gemma Murphy. I'm from the Wales Cooperative Centre, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to message me or my colleague Maggie. We can be found in the participants list on the right-hand side. But I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm going to welcome up Chris from Parago on stage. We've been working in partnership with them to deliver these sessions. So Chris, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, Gemma. So thanks for joining us today at this digital transformation webinar series. It's organised by the good people at the Welsh Cooperative, or Wales Cooperative. And my name is Chris Elias. I'm a communication manager at Parago. And if you haven't heard of Parago, we're a really kind of small Swansea-based company that help organisations deliver better services through things like user-centred design, communications, leadership support, and hands-on delivery as well. So we love thinking about how we can use digital to help deliver better services, and we're pleased to be part of this workshop series, which this is the kind of third out of a series of 4 that we're doing in partnership with the Wales Cooperative. So I'm going to be a facilitator this afternoon, and I'll be handing over to our guest speakers today in just a little while. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit about these webinars. So this is the third of a 4-part series exploring themes around digital transformation. Today's session will be focusing on putting users first. So as organisations, we're ultimately judged by the quality of services that we provide to our users and customers. And if a service is poorly designed, inflexible, slow, or all 3, the conclusion is that we are too. So we don't want to be put into that circle. So to give us the best kind of platform to start off with, we're really privileged to be joined by a colleague of mine, Jess Neely, who's Service Design and Research Lead at Parago, Ariel Tai, who's Head of Development at Promo Cymru, and Polly Cook, Head of Service Transformation in Parkinson's UK. So they'll be sharing their stories and advice on what we can do to put our users first. We'll make sure that we leave room for questions at the end, but please feel free to ask questions during the chat, and I'll do my best to kind of put those together so that we can get the best out of the time that we've got at the end. We're also privileged to be joined by another colleague of mine, Angharad. Angharad, do you want to come to the stage and say a couple of words about what you'll be doing with us today? Maybe not. Okay. So Angharad is on hand. She may be having a couple of technical difficulties at the moment, but rest assured, Angharad will be keeping an eye on our question and answers today. And what Angharad will be doing is making it easily and accessible for us to communicate either way. So either you asking us questions, or if you prefer to have any answers or parts of the slide or presentation translated into Welsh, Angharad will help facilitate that for us today as well. So if you need anything like that, Angharad, Pris is in the chat, so just drop her a message and she'll do her best to help out. So we want today to be as interactive as possible, so please ask your questions. And if you have any technical difficulties, as Gemma has already said, just message herself or Molly in the chat as well. So I think that's everything that we need to go through now. So I'd first like to introduce our first speaker, Jess, who is Service Design and Research Lead here at Parago. Jess?
Hello, thanks, Chris.
No problem.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so as Chris said, I work at Parago, and my background is working in digital and user-centred design roles across UK central government. But now working at Parago, I get to do the same sort of thing, but working within the Welsh public sector, which is really cool because at the moment, this way of working does appear to be really building in Wales. So I'm going to be talking a bit about what we mean by putting users first when it comes to digital, or even just designing any parts of a service, and why that's an important thing to do. So next slide, please, Chris. So I wanted to start with a reflection on what the third sector is here to do. So appreciating the other things that the sector does, which you'll all know much more about than me, things like lobbying and influencing policy, a core part of the offering is to deliver really important services to people. So taking a user-centered approach to the design of these services is how you ensure they meet the needs of the people who will use them. Because if the service doesn't meet the needs of the people who will use them, then what's the point in that service existing? Next slide, please, Chris. And hopefully that's like a really obvious kind of concept, but it can be really easy to lose your way when getting into the nitty-gritty of designing something, especially when you bring digital into it. In society in general, we're kind of trained to think of solutions, and we're told things like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And we like thinking about new ideas. It's fun, it's creative. You got a new idea for an app or a website or something that we could do with AI. But those ideas alone don't make a service good. It's user-centered design that can help us always refer back to the why of why we're doing something, what problem we're trying to solve, and who it's for. And I'm going to go through some of the questions that you can ask yourselves and your team during different stages of service development. And answering those questions will help ensure that the users are put first the whole time. So next slide, please, Chris. So what the service is. When you're creating a new service, we need to put users first when determining what that service is going to be. So we need to really understand, who is that for? Is it for people with a certain health condition or of a certain age, living in a particular area, who experienced a certain life event? And for those people, what is their life like? What do they care about? What are they trying to do or achieve? And what do they need in order to do this? And then you can look at, where is the opportunity to provide something of value to these people? And once you have that, you can ask, why is it right that your organization provides this service? How does this align with what the organization's goals are, what the organization wants to achieve? And this sort of stuff applies whether it's a brand new service offering that you're designing, or if you're looking to introduce a new component of an existing service. If you don't put the users and their needs first here, when you're thinking about the strategy of a new thing, then how will you know whether you're making something that will be useful to people? Next slide, please, Chris. So the next bit then is how that service is going to work. So once you've got a proposition that will meet user needs and will fit with your organization's goals, you need to decide how it's going to work. You need to put users first here and ask questions like, how will people interact with this service? It could be through a website or a phone line, or like turning up somewhere in person, or any combination of those things. And as this webinar is in a series about digital transformation, then I'll assume you have some interest in delivering some services through digital channels. And that obviously doesn't mean replacing humans with digital channels altogether, but it's about working out where human intervention adds value to the service delivery, and where a digital service would be simpler, clearer, faster for people, as well as save time and money in running costs for the organization. But obviously just deciding that part of the service will be delivered through digital doesn't immediately make it simple, clearer, faster, unfortunately. So we need to think about things like, where the user is going to find the service, how will they know that it exists, and how will they come across it? How will they know if they're eligible for it? Once they do come across it, can everyone successfully use it for its intended purposes? Do people understand what it says and what they need to do? And the everyone is important here, because we need to think about, what are the barriers that people can have when accessing a service, and how do we design the service in a way that makes it possible for them to be included in it? And also, do all the different parts of the service make sense? Because we don't experience specific interactions with an organization in isolation. Often the service experience is made up of multiple steps. It could be like a digital touch point, as well as a phone call, as well as a letter. But often different teams in an organization are responsible for the different channels. So this involves working together across different teams to ensure that whole service works for users. And then last slide, please, Chris. So the final section here is then about evaluating how the service is performing. So now you've got a service that's running, and you need to keep an eye on, how it's performing for users. So asking questions like, are the users getting what they need from the service, and is it achieving what it set out to achieve? Have the needs that people have from the service changed over time? And is there anything that evidence can tell us about the improvements that might be needed to the service? So by putting users first here, when evaluating the performance of a service, we can continue to improve it, and things like spotting new gaps if there are new opportunities for other services, and also determining if a service is actually no longer needed and needs to be retired. So that's everything from me. Kind of to sum up, putting users first remains important throughout the whole way when you're designing a service in its kind of life cycle. So from when you're deciding what service to offer, how it will work and how it's performing. And the risk that if we don't do this is that we end up with a service that no one needed or no one can use, which I assume that no one wants that to happen. So that's it from me. I'll hand over next to Ariel, who will talk a bit about a project that they've been doing at Promo Cymru, working in this way. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jess. My name's Ariel Tai, and I'm Head of Development at Promo Cymru, and we're a social enterprise and charity, and we design a whole range of digital services for young people and communities. And through developing our own services and understanding and building this expertise, we now actually support a whole range of third sector organisations, charities, and also the public sector as well, to transform services into digital spaces. So that's a big part of my work. And I'm a really big believer that user-centered design is one of the most important skills that our sector really needs to be able to deliver modern, effective services for people today. And I speak to many charities and third sector organisations that can feel quite overwhelmed with what's needed and what those first steps are when you're actually trying to design digital services. Next slide, please. So let's take the technology out of it. And actually, it's really, for me, it's all about creating accessible services. So how do we find a service? How do we use a service? How do we contact and engage with the service? And how do we feed back? And this is really just a modern experience that we have of accessing any service today. And so a person-centered service is about being available for people when they need it in a way that meets their needs. We see this everywhere now. Our expectations have gone right up about how we can access services. When you're ordering a pizza, you actually can get alerts as when it's coming. You can watch the pizza being made in the oven. You know exactly when your delivery driver is going to turn up, and you even know their name and all of these things, so they can sort of manage that expectation. So it's that whole journey that we're talking about. And I'm going to share an example with you on a project that I worked with with Public Health Wales, and that is a public sector project. But actually, the learning that we got from that is really, really relevant to lots of the work that we're doing. So next slide, please. So the project we worked on was really about rethinking sexual health information for young people. And so one of the first things we did was had to completely strip it back, speak to lots of young people, and also speak to health professionals working in this field, and really gain an understanding of what that user journey looked like. So what was it like for a young person to find out about the service and actually all the way through to accessing the service? Now, we painted a bit of a picture of this, and this is one of the quite poor experiences that we spoke to a young person about. So step one, they're a bit concerned that they might have chlamydia or have an STI. So they start searching online. They're horrified because they find all sorts of conflicting information, and it's very, very hard to digest and find the information they actually need. But then they actually do find their local clinic, and they turn up to their clinic, and as you can see, they're sort of feeling that their emotions are changing at different points in the journey. So once they find their clinic, they're feeling happy, but actually they realize that they can't book an appointment online. They actually just have to go to the clinic and turn up at a particular time and wait in a queue. Obviously, when they get there and they wait in this queue, being a young person, that can also bring in lots of different feelings of anxiety, etc. Anyway, the journey goes on. Unfortunately, this young person ended up getting turned away, and they weren't actually able to access the service when they got there because they'd turned up actually at the wrong time. So if you can move the slides on, please. So the main themes, to summarize what we found when we started to look at what was really happening for young people, was that it really wasn't easy to find out what to do and where to go if you needed help around your sexual health, despite there being information online. So these big information pages that you can digest and you can read, but actually it wasn't that easy for young people to process that information. Sometimes we found that you can turn up to the clinic and get turned away. So this is another big issue. And also young people are feeling very anxious about attending an STI clinic. So this is again about putting users first. You have to think about how that feels for somebody and take that into account when you're redesigning services. Next slide, please. So based on these findings, we had these two main challenges that we wanted to meet. So how do we make the information available to young people easier to digest? And how do we help young people to feel less anxious about attending a clinic? Next slide, please. So this was the solution that we came up with after lots of testing and trials and continuing to work with young people and service providers. And actually, we scrapped the information page and we said, what would happen if instead of having like a whole page of information that you have to read through, it's a logic survey. So the idea is that you go on there and you answer a series of questions, and the information that comes out is completely tailored for you. So you are given an exact action that you need to take to be able to go and get support with your sexual health. So we designed this actually using Typeform. It was a very low cost tool, and we tested this. And actually we found by doing this, it made it much simpler and clearer for young people to understand what they need to do and how they get help. Right at the end, the idea is that it then links you to your local clinic, and you could even book an appointment through that. Some of those developments weren't able to be put in place yet, but this is the actual ideal journey that it would look like for a young person. Next slide, please. And then in terms of alleviating some of that anxiety, what we designed was a whole rich bank of information for young people on specific issues. So what they really told us was they want case studies. They want to know what happens when you go to a clinic. They want to know what an actual sexual health test is and what it means. So we created a whole range of content as well for young people to, again, help that journey. Next slide, please. So coming to the end, we really were able to look at, I suppose, what that ideal pathway would be for a young person. And we've sort of, as you can see, our map has changed now. So the young person goes online, they search for information, they find the right place. It gives them the exact precise information they need. They can then do their own research and have a look at information pages to be able to see what's going to happen to them, where their clinic is, and ask a range of questions. And actually, finally, they get the support they need. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I just think these are really good tools when you're starting to think about user-centered design. Start thinking about mapping your journey through the perspective of one of your service users and have a look at how it's working for them and where those problem points are, and then have a go at actually solving some of those things. But that's the end of my talk, and I'm now going to pass over to Polly.
Thanks, Ariel. That was great. I love that visual content. Yeah, really brilliant. Hi, everyone. I'm Polly. I'm Head of Service Transformation at Parkinson's UK. It's really lovely to be here today to talk about this subject, which is obviously really close to a lot of us and we're really passionate about. So Parkinson's is the fastest growing neurological condition in the world. And as an organisation, we want to be there for everyone living with Parkinson's and their friends and family from the moment that they are diagnosed. If we move on to the next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. 20 20% more people are going to be diagnosed with Parkinson's over the next few years. And we offer a fantastic amount of information support service that reaches thousands of people a year. But the reality is that our existing service is unable to scale to meet demand. We also know that we need to work as effectively and efficiently as possible, and meeting those changing user expectations that both Jess and Ariel have just mentioned there. We also know as an organisation that we're not there for everyone that we want to be. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of reaching more underserved communities, making a really clear offer for friends and family as well. So a couple of years ago, we set out on this big challenge. How can we scale and reach our information support services to be fit for the future? So the way that we did that is we brought together a team of people. If we move on to the next slide, please, Chris. We brought together a team of people. And crucially for this talk, I just kind of want to focus on the right-hand side here, that we had a team of people within Parkinson's UK. We brought together a service design team, so a cross-functional team of designers, researchers, data product. We also had operational model leads. This service transformation is quite big. It's across all of our information support services, and it's across someone's entire journey of living with Parkinson's. So we needed to make sure that we set it up in the right way. But crucially, we work hand in hand with people living with Parkinson's, with their family and friends and carers, and with healthcare professionals. We do that in a number of different ways, from making sure that we're doing user research, those feedback loops, but also that we have a co-design group of people, basically an extension of our team that we work really closely with as well. So I wanted to pull out one example really here on where I think putting users first has kind of made genuine impact in the services that we've designed. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Chris. And that is, yes, I'm going to mention the word COVID, because this is actually all about our kind of COVID response. If I can take you guys back to March last year, obviously when COVID was just a very new thing, and as an organisation everything was changing, and the services that we were offering, some of them were not able to continue in the way that they had previously done, with face-to-face appointments, etc. So we really needed to rethink how we were going to meet user need. But of course these needs were changing all the time, and what we knew before, we were entering an entirely new space. So we were really lucky that we had this existing co-design team that we could basically point to the problem at hand, and we had the skills within that to do that. So we started off with some user research. Crucially, we did some interviews, really understanding what people are experiencing, what they're feeling, how's this impacting them. We did some staff interviews as well, and kind of some shadowing and listening in. What cases have they been dealing with today? Where were the key areas that people needed support? And of course, we had a really good look at the data to look at what key themes are coming out of the inquiries. What are people looking at on the website, for example? And once we pulled together all of this data, we synthesized it. So we pulled out like some of the really key insights that would help inform what services needed, what services we needed to provide over the next few months. Those key insights, I've pulled out kind of 4 key ones from April last year. So firstly, people who are being identified as most vulnerable and needing support at this time, actually a lot of them didn't have access to technology. People didn't feel like they have control over the information that they're receiving, and it can feel scary and unimaginable. I know it certainly felt like that for me back in March last year, and I'm not someone that lives with a long-term condition. People were concerned about their employment rights. Prolonged and consistent anxiety is having an immediate impact on people's physical and mental health. And of course, to be honest, all of these insights have remained really true throughout the last year or so. So we went through a process of, once we'd developed these insights, a process of pulling out some of the key hypotheses within that. What can we test? What can we start? What can we prototype to make sure that we're meeting these user needs? So starting with really scrappy pieces of paper and prototyping some ideas, getting them in front of users and testing what might work. We developed some services that I genuinely believe have had real impact for people. I'm going to just touch on them now. If you move on to the next slide, Chris. So firstly, just in terms of that key insight there around people finding the information that they the information completely unimaginable and quite scary. We got to the point where we designed and developed a tailored support tool, so to allow people to navigate and tailor what information they are actually seeing, so it's personalised to them. So this might be things around navigating the healthcare system at this time. We had some specific content for if you're a family member and friend, and some of the key insights that we had around that. It might be around kind of benefits and access to employment advice, etc. So that kind of key tool, people were more engaged than they usually were on our information support pages. And I guess just to what you were saying, Ariel, in terms of like a massive kind of bit of bit of information, actually people were finding quite hard to navigate. So people were more engaged with this. Crucially, people were actually taking action off the back of the content and that they were actually viewing. So we were actually doing this in a way that enabled people to take action. And actually, when we put this live, the inquiries to our helpline about these specific issues that we had covered on this tool actually reduced. So many of you that might have kind of multifaceted like services, so we have a helpline, we also have our website actually to kind of get that equal balance on demand. So it reduced the demand, which was extremely high on our helpline with this self-serve support tool. We developed a new wellbeing check-in, supporting people to access one of our skilled advisors and have a phone call with them. Really someone to talk through anything that they're particularly struggling with, anything that they might need some advice on. And this wellbeing check-in was put in a slightly different way than we did with our helpline. So as opposed to it just being a telephone number, we gave people the ability to actually book a call. 80% of people using this wellbeing check-in were completely new to our services. They'd never called our helpline or spoken to one of our advisors before. So that was like a real genuine, that really genuinely came out of all of the user insight that we had got in the first part of the project. And then I know that this is a digital transformation conference, but actually I mentioned that some of the people that were actually finding things really difficult to access content. As you can imagine, many of them were also offline. So we developed a booklet. It was actually a sort of a 28-page kind of magazine, and distributed that to people that were most vulnerable with no access to technology. And the magazine covered things like some support on allowing people to exercise at home, which is really important if you have Parkinson's, some support around mental health, some articles around kind of peer support, and many other aspects to it. And yes, it was an offline product, but actually it had genuine impact. So I think if I was just to bring this back in terms of like the key things, I would just say start with that research, really challenge your organizational wisdom, of which, we all have plenty of, and there's plenty of people that work side by side with service users, but actually you will learn so much by actually spending time interviewing, spending a good amount of time with your users. Take a long look at your data. If you've got access to data, it can be incredibly powerful, especially if you have that data with some of the interviews that you have. Draw out those kind of key insight statements, because it will really help you focus on what is important and what the user needs actually are. And then from there, it is obviously a process of prototyping and testing before you move into full development of everything. Everything that you kind of see in this screen started as a real hash potch of kind of scrappy bits of paper before we landed here. And that is me. I will hand back over to you, Chris.
Hi, Polly. If you just kind of stay on, I'll invite the other two back. Thank you so much for taking the time to put that together. Wow was the kind of thing, is how deep that, I mean, we all know that user need is important, particularly in our industry, and many of the people on the call are obviously going to know it's there. But I feel that really kind of brought it to life in terms of how kind of deep that kind of goes into making a difference into people's lives. Is Ariel back on? I can see Jess and Polly. I can't see Ariel though. There's Ariel. Hiya, you okay? Can you all hear me okay? There we are. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Hopefully that will kind of make our faces kind of bigger for everyone. So if you're okay, thanks again. Once again, I'll just ask a couple of questions and encourage everyone on the call as well. I think we're really kind of privileged to have a kind of wealth of information in the minds of you guys this afternoon. So please do, if there's any questions, I'm sure even the ones that you don't think, maybe immediately obvious, then please ask them. But to start off, I'd like to ask Ariel, if you don't mind. We've all talked about kind of the user need and getting that insight in terms of surveys, face-to-face interview and experience testing, that type of thing. What's your personal favourite and why?
So two tools that I find really, really useful. One of them is just one-on-one interviews. So I think just actually speaking to somebody one-on-one is where you get the most rich information rather than through surveys. I think they're good, but I feel that's really where you get those sort of rich insights. And then the other tool that I found particularly useful is actually storyboarding and trying to get somebody to actually map out the exact journey that they currently take. So with the sexual health example, what we did was we went into a secondary school and we spoke to young people and we sort of gave them a real life scenario and sort of said, you were out on the weekend, unfortunately you had unprotected sex, you've come into school Monday and now you're terrified that you might have an STI. What do you do? And actually we got them then to go on their phones and find and see, did they find the right route? And by doing that, we could actually see how they genuinely would behave, because there's something really interesting about design, that actually what we say we do and what we actually do are two different things. So it's really important to actually try and look at methods that look at how somebody behaves rather than just taking what they say. So I think it's those two methods together work really well for me.
Okay, Polly?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Ariel. I love doing those two as well. I would say another thing that we did sort of at the start of Parkinson's Connect, the transformation that we're doing, is ethnographies. So spending a really good amount of time actually with the people that we're designing these services with, and we would spend kind of days, and some of that is kind of in interviews and documenting, and some of it is just observing kind of day-to-day life for someone living with Parkinson's. So yeah, I think I would throw that one into the mix, but I think definitely the storyboarding, Ariel, I'd agree with that. That's a really great way of drawing out that insight.
And Jess?
Really glad you came to me last there, Chris. I feel like I have to come up with something unique now. I think interviewing and observing people use something are the two kind of main techniques I would use. So if they already have a service that they use, then sitting down and just watching them use that thing, or if you've made like a new prototype or something, watching them and seeing if they can actually complete the task successfully. And it's kind of back to what Ariel said of, it's not necessarily just what people say, but what they do and what works for them. And I've seen so many times where I've watched someone use a prototype and misunderstand it and really struggle, and then at the end they're like, oh, that was really good, thank you, because people are polite and don't want to, or maybe don't even recognize the mistakes that they'd made with it. So trying to be really clear on what does success look like and watching out for that.
Okay, excellent. I remember something years ago, there was I read something about surveys and people being, when asked what perfume they had, and they would always say a posh brand, and it was never reflective of what they actually did, but it's just that they didn't want to say that they kind of bought like Tesco's own brand or whatever. So the insight was absolutely rubbish, but yeah, I'll never forget that. So really useful. Jess, I'm going to come to you first. We've actually had a question in from someone that's on the call. I'll come to you first on this one. Where do we start to get our organisation thinking about what we need to do in terms of services and users? What has worked for you and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just been quite pragmatic, because I went through a massive list of like, you have to do all of these things and answer all of these questions. But really, if that's not the way you're working, or maybe you do some of these things but not others, then it's just working out where in the project are you and what do you have room to pivot on. Because if you're quite far down, say developing a new service, then like being realistic about what can you do. Can you go out and test the thing that you've built and do some user research around it? Can you look at existing data that you might have or work within whatever you have? But I think, yeah, the one thing probably it boils down to is doing some user research is probably the most useful first step.
Okay, and Ariel, is it a cultural thing, do you think? Does an organisation need to be able to want to think in this way to do it? And that's probably one of the first steps, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's, and I think it actually gels really well with our sector, because in the charity sector, we are all about putting people first. So it is, this culture already exists, but service design has got a really great methodology that you can follow. And like Jess said, the first step is really talking to your service users. But also, I think one thing that's like really important to do is to just think at the beginning that you are just discovering, you're just finding out stuff. Do not jump to the solutions, because that's what I think tangles us up, because we think, oh, we need an app, or we needed this, or we needed that, and that it's just not where you start. Unfortunately, a lot of us do start there, and then you actually just get up in this mess of trying to get your, all your thinking towards designing an app, but it's not. It's just really listening first and truly finding out. I think Polly said, Jess said earlier, what are the problems? Look at the problems, don't look at the solutions.
Excellent. Polly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guys have covered it, but I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is accept it will be a bit messy. So accept that beginning, what you started out, and this kind of nice, neat project that you might have set out for and got funding for, etc. Accept that those in that discovery phase, like things might change quite a lot, and actually what you thought was the problem that you were here to solve, actually it might not actually be that, and you might uncover. So I think that kind of that messiness and that kind of feeling of uncomfortableness, like as you're kind of, taking an organisation through that.
Excellent. A related question that I wouldn't mind asking, is if there's an organisation that necessarily doesn't have a kind of service design team or a service design person, and they're thinking, or they're in this call and they're thinking, we really need to start doing stuff like this because of whatever business reason they've got. Is it ever kind of too late in a project to start thinking like this, or is it something you really have to do at the start? Polly, we'll come back to you.
No, I mean, I suppose, ideally, it would be at the start that you start with your users. But I suppose if it's at a later point in the project, just accept and listen. So I think it's quite easy to kind of think that you're going to users to validate what your assumptions are, and actually, working with users might completely throw up and kind of point you in another direction. So I guess if you're doing it slightly later on, then be prepared to pivot on what you're doing. And I think just in terms of kind of if you're not set up with a service design team and service designers, there's like one of the things that we did with the projects that we're working on is actually seconded people in from kind of frontline service delivery and other areas of the organisation, and basically kind of worked together and skilled up in this area. So been doing that for a couple of years, and certainly on my team now we've got incredible service designers, but actually their background was in kind of service delivery. So yeah, I think that's that there are definitely kind of creative ways of doing this and making it happen.
Brilliant. You've just made me look like a fantastic facilitator, because it segues lovely onto the next question that we've got, which is, how do you become a user researcher or service designer, and what were your career paths? So Polly, just to carry on then, seeing as that's what you were just talking about. In terms of my career path, I've worked in digital in the charity sector for kind of 12 years or so, and actually digital when I first started was basically
broadcasting content, and then obviously, you know, things moved on pretty rapidly from that, and then kind of started moving into digital transformation and kind of program management from there, and then really kind of immersed myself in user-centered design, but also design-led change from an organizational design perspective. So that's been my career path. But I think in terms of how do you become a user researcher or service designer, I think so much of it is in your mindset and how you think, and there's always ways that you can kind of progress into these roles.
Brilliant. Jess, are you doing today what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I am. I mean, I didn't know this job existed when I was, well, a teenager. But when I did a psychology degree, and then when I was graduating, I think I came across the area of human factors, which is a kind of like sister to user-centered design, but it's typically more like the design of physical products. And I think I went to a talk about someone who works in like designing oil rigs or something, and I was like, oh, that sounds really good. I probably don't want to spend my life on oil rigs, but the concept of design and making stuff for people really appealed to me. But then the way I got into it, because it's unnecessarily hard, I think, to get into this profession, and it's something that we all need to try and make more accessible. But I got into like a digital role in the civil service, and then just shuffled a bit to end up where I wanted to be. But it was still a lot of just like self-taught learning, reading, and like going to community events and training and kind of anything I can to just upskill myself in it.
Brilliant. And Ariel, any differences? What was any learnings from your path, and any advice for the person that's asking the question?
Mine was really organic, actually. I never saw myself doing this. I didn't know it existed. I actually graduated in radio, so I did a lot of like broadcasting and, like Polly said, content. So that's what it was all about, digital. I was also a youth worker, and so that's why I ended up getting a job at Promo Cymru, because we do a lot of work with young people in communities, and we do a lot of digital work, and at the time, lots and lots of content. And actually, our organisation has just really developed really organically into this space, because it was always about designing better services. So we used to use different principles like lean, you know, how do you make them really effective? We got into agile, and then user-centered design, you know, it was something we started to learn about. And actually all of these things, again, I totally agree that it's a mindset. Our mindset was already there in the organisation. How do you improve things? How do you make things better for people? And how do you co-produce? So that was my journey.
So you've all come across really passionate, not just about the kind of service design, but also particularly the kind of topics that you're designing. In terms of a ratio balance, how important is it about the want to, as Jess was pointing out, the want to actually make things and services better for people? How important is that compared to the actual thing that you're doing? So, you know, Polly, Parkinson's, and Ariel, the things that you're doing with young people. Do you need to care about the things that you're designing to do it? Ariel?
Is that a question for me? Sorry. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I think you need to care about it, definitely. You know, I think you have to have a lot of empathy. That's like a really big, you know, if you've got a lot of empathy, you'll probably be a good designer, because you have to really think about it from somebody else's perspective. But that's why, again, I'll say it again, I think it fits so well with our sector, you know, because we are here, we do work in our jobs for a different reason, you know, to make things better for our service users.
Okay. Polly, agree?
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree with that. I think it's kind of I mean, it's impossible really to work in the charity sector unless you care about, you know, unless you really care about the service users that you're here for. I think as Ariel said, I just think it's such a natural fit for our sector. And I think as well, like through the process, even if you don't have any personal relationship with, you know, whatever your cause is, actually, you know, the more you do this, the more people you meet, the more stories you meet, and, you know, you get pretty invested and pretty passionate about making things better for them.
Brilliant. Jess, something we've talked about recently, I wouldn't mind kind of asking you, is, you know, it's great when you're looking at a service potentially or transformation. You've got a blank sheet of paper with a question like, how do we make this better? But just what are the kind of, that doesn't happen, I'm guessing, kind of 90% of the time. There's usually some kind of prerequisites or policies or something like that you need to deal with as well. Like, what should the people on this call be looking at before they start kind of thinking about redesigning a new service or making something better?
I think projects do start for all kinds of different reasons. Like sometimes it might be that there's a big corporate priority to change something, or there's a big problem, and then you can kind of just do the project that was already going to happen, but try and do it in a user-centered way and take some of this stuff into account. And then other times it could be that you got more of a kind of blank slate. Like some of the projects I'm working on recently, it's more that like we've got funding to improve something, but now you need to try and work out where the best place to put the effort in is. And I think it is just worth at that point spending the time to like understand the direction you want to go in, not just trying to like jump on the first thing. I also think these projects often need a bit of a clear focus, because if you try and like fix everything all at once or go too broad, it can be really hard to actually get something through to implementing it. So finding a problem that you evidenced and exists, and then following that through and not trying to get sidetracked, I think is really useful. Yeah,
but Polly, Ariel, are there kind of many restrictions in your kind of, your kind of areas that you're in that make you frustrated in any way, that you'd really think that this would offer a huge user for the benefit for the user that perhaps is constrained by some law or practice or ethical kind of reason or anything? Have you come up against any of that, Polly?
No, actually, to be honest, Chris, and maybe I'm just really lucky in that.
It wasn't a loaded question. It was just there's so much, obviously it's such a kind of big part of some people's lives, isn't it? There has to be regulated in such a way. I thought there may have been, but certainly wasn't loaded.
Yeah, I mean, we work a lot of what we're doing with Parkinson's Connect is kind of integrating into the NHS, which like certainly has its challenges, and we have to navigate through and work with the NHS on kind of governance, etc. So I would say, there are certainly elements and areas that you wish were slightly easier to navigate, for sure. But yeah, I guess that's kind of part of the ride, and you get a lot of learnings from doing that and scaling up slowly as well.
Yeah. Ariel?
I think the way that projects are funded often doesn't really allow or fit with the user-centered design approach, because quite often when you're applying for funding, it's actually for an end product. So you've already sort of like come up with the solution. And sometimes I think that's where it can create a bit of conflict. The amount of projects that we do where we keep saying, we don't know yet, but we do know what the issue is. We don't know yet. And actually that's really hard, I think, for people to get their head around that, well, what is it you're going to do? And actually what we're going to do is a process. But things are changing, because definitely this is getting more mainstream. But that's something we've come across a lot, where it's like people are really focused, like that could be the funding, or an organization we're working with is just absolutely focused on that end product and what that's going to be, rather than we say, well, it might not be that. What if when we go through the process, that isn't really what's needed? So we come across that a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure you can see my questions that I've got prepared here on screen, Ariel. that was going to be one of them as well. It was, do you ever find yourself having a problem to fit a solution, and how do you kind of work with the business to kind of get them to think a little bit differently? But I think you answered that really well. We've got another question here, and I think you hopefully have got some good kind of resources. So where can we find out more about doing service design well? And are there any good websites or case studies that you're fond of or you use in your day-to-day stuff, Jess?
Well, coming through like UK central government, I follow the government digital services guidance. So you've got the service manual, which has a lot of guidance about building good digital services, but also just in general, like user research, what makes a good service, thinking about services like that are joined up across organizations, and there's lots of really useful things there. books wise, I think Lou Downs' Good Services book is a really good introduction to what makes a service good and all the different factors in that. What else? I think, again, like community stuff. There's lots of like service design networks and service design communities that are out there that you can join and get access to people through there.
Brilliant. Ariel, Polly?
Yes, we actually hold an event. Here's a bit of a plug. With Promo Cymru, we have a network called Creating Conversations. So if you go on our website, you can join our mailing list. And actually, we get together about sort of quarterly to really discuss these things. We hold free training sessions as well to and sort of have conversations where we share learning. And another source that I have to mention here is the Catalyst. So search for the Catalyst. They've got, it's a whole UK-wide movement, lots and lots of funding behind it. And it's all about improving how we design services through this approach. And there's lots of free support there for charities. So as a charity, you can actually get grants, you can get funding, you can sign up to design hops, and there's information pages with all sorts of great resources. So yeah, the Catalyst, I would definitely recommend that.
Excellent plug. Really good. Polly, anything to add?
I don't know if I have actually. I've like scribbled down some notes, and it's pretty much all been covered. But I mean, I think that there's so many things going on, and so many kind of service design meetups. Meeting and chatting with other people that are doing it, going through the challenges of it. So I would just say, get talking to people, get reading Medium blogs, and I think Lou Downs' book is the way to start.
Yeah, and I think, as you just said there now, I think having the confidence on something like this, taking note of the other people that are on the call and just kind of, fire off that kind of email or introduction and just get kind of talking to people is always a good way of doing things as well. We're just coming up to the end now, but there's one really quick one here that follows on from something Jess said earlier, which says, Jess said that service design should be more accessible as a career. Do we have any ideas about how we can help facilitate this, especially in Wales? Is there anything we want to start a movement on from this call now that we want to get people involved in doing?
All the jobs. Create the job.
No, what is the thing? Is it publicity, or is it being better at recruitment or job adverts?
The jobs aren't there. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to create entry-level roles or roles for career switchers that people can go into. Because unless you're already in an organisation that you can kind of pivot as part of your role or do a secondment, like Polly said, I think we need to start actually just hiring those roles that we don't have a lot of vacancies for at the moment.
Okay, so if we've got those senior people on the call, then that's a really good kind of action for them to take away and be considerate about that. Anything else from Ariel, Polly?
We need to start funding things differently. We need to start funding people to actually work things out and give that space for people to pilot and test and fail as well, so that we're not just coming up with all of these measures and trying to make our projects fit. We have to just change the culture so that actually it's a culture about learning and testing. So that would be my bit for the campaign.
Okay. And Polly?
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's been such a massive shift in the charity sector that I can see over the past few years in terms of how transparent we are and how much more we share with each other. And I think that just needs to continue and go strength to strength. So actually, when people are, maybe some of the bigger organisations are working on service design, to actually, make it open, make it more transparent, to share about it. There's nothing more powerful than just having a chat over a virtual cup of tea, I guess, these days. But yeah, I think we need to do more of that.
Yeah, excellent. I think I think we've pretty much kind of come up to the full hour there without any kind of difficulty in or awkward silences or anything like that, which it's been absolutely fantastic having you on today, and thanks to you and your organizations for giving up the time for you to share your knowledge. And yeah, I think Gemma's come back on. Gemma, do you want to say a couple of words to wrap up?
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. It was lovely hearing so many practical examples, and yeah, the case studies you presented were really, really lovely. So yeah, fab. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to bring everybody back to the floor now. The room's open for another 10 minutes if you did want to network. If you do want to move between tables, all you have to do is double click on the table you want to hop to. But yeah, thanks very much. We've got our next webinar in 2 weeks' time. So if you haven't signed up for that, that is still live. You can still book that. So that's our final one. So yeah, we look forward to yeah, 2 weeks' time. But thanks everybody, and yeah, I'll see you on the floor now.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, Polly. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, everyone.